If you can translate this, I'll marry you. The voice of Clara Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Global Holdings, echoed through the vast marble lobby of her company's headquarters in downtown Manhattan. Her laughter sliced through the air like glass. In front of her, kneeling in a puddle of soapy water, was Eli Turner, a quiet janitor with calloused hands and eyes that carried more wisdom than his uniform suggested. He looked up slowly, blinking under the bright fluorescent lights that reflected off the marble floor. Clara dangled a crumpled contract between her manicured fingers. At least then, she sneered, you'd be worth something. Her European investors burst into laughter. A few took pictures on their phones. Clara's assistant, nervously trying to blend in, covered her mouth to hide a guilty smile. Even the front desk security guard looked away, pretending to check his phone. Eli said nothing. He picked up his fallen mop bucket and the cloth she'd kicked across the floor. Dirty water soaked through his sleeves as he wiped at the mess. Her mess. Clara strutted toward the elevator, her designer heels clacking on marble. Some people know their place, she announced. The elevator doors closed with a polished chime, and just like that, the room exhaled. The laughter faded. The only sound left was the squeak of Eli's mop and the slow drip of water onto the tiles. But humiliation, as fate often writes it, is sometimes the first chapter of greatness. Have you ever judged someone and later realized they were the person holding your future? 2 hours later, chaos erupted 40 floors above. Inside the glass-walled conference room, Clara Whitmore's empire was collapsing in real time. The billion-dollar European alliance deal, 18 months in the making, was falling apart before her eyes. C'est impossible, shouted the French representative, slamming a folder on the table. The German delegate spoke furiously in his native tongue. The Italian CEO threw up his hands. The Spanish investors stood, muttering about broken trust. Clara's heart pounded as she glanced at the giant screen filled with graphs, projections, and red alerts. Her CFO, Michael Ruiz, leaned close and whispered, "The translators are accurate, but something's wrong. They're misunderstanding each other completely." "Then fix it," she hissed. "I don't care how." But the misunderstanding wasn't technical, it was cultural. And every word spoken in that room pulled the deal closer to its death. Her phone buzzed non-stop with messages from panicked board members. The company's stock had already dropped 7% in the last hour. She felt sweat bead at her temples as she faced the delegates again. "Please, everyone," Clara pleaded, "we can resolve this." "No," said the Spanish delegate, his voice sharp but weary. "We cannot work with a company that refuses to understand our meaning." And just like that, the French began packing their folders. The Germans zipped their leather bags. The Italians stood and whispered among themselves, glancing toward the door. Clara felt the marble floor tilt beneath her. Years of ambition, degrees, and sleepless nights reduced to fragments. Outside the room, Eli Turner emptied trash bins quietly. He paused when he heard the voices through the glass, rapid, angry, desperate. Unlike everyone else in that building, he understood every word. The janitor, who had been mocked for speaking softly, could speak 5 languages fluently. Michael Ruiz, exhausted, stepped into the hallway for air. He loosened his tie and rubbed his forehead. That's when he noticed Eli standing still, eyes fixed on the conference room. "You okay there?" Michael asked, Eli startled slightly. "Sorry, sir, just..." "Listening," Michael frowned.
"Listening?"
"You understand that chaos in there?" Eli hesitated, then nodded slowly. "A little more than most." Michael raised an eyebrow. "Try me," Eli took a quiet breath. "The Spanish team keeps saying compromiso, but your translators keep turning it into compromise. In Spanish, that word means commitment, not settlement. They think you're asking them to settle for less, not to build together." Michael blinked. Eli continued, his voice steady. "The French representative uses benefice, but she means mutual benefit, not just profit. It's being translated wrong, so she sounds greedy when she's really talking about fairness." He gestured toward the glass. "And the Germans, they're using Verantwortung, which your translators are calling liability, but they mean moral duty. They think you're missing the soul of the agreement." Michael stared at him, stunned. A man who cleaned floors had just solved the heart of a billion-dollar disaster in 30 seconds. "How do you know all this?" he asked. Eli smiled faintly. "My mother used to clean offices in the International District. I translated for her clients since I was 8. You learn that words aren't just what they mean, they're what people feel when they say them." Inside, Clara was shouting into her phone, her voice cracking. "Through the glass, the Germans were leaving. Can you fix this?" Michael asked. Eli hesitated. I'm just the janitor. No, Michael said. You're the only person in this building who actually understands what's going on. Moments later, the conference room door burst open. Clara's assistant stepped out, pale and trembling. They're leaving, she whispered. It's over. Michael looked at Eli, then made a decision that would change everything. Wait here, he said. Don't move. He re-entered the conference room, the air thick with tension. Clara's voice was sharp and desperate. If you don't have a miracle, Michael, don't even speak. He smiled faintly. Actually, I think I just found one. The delegates turned. Michael opened the door and beckoned Eli inside. Every head turned. A janitor in a faded gray uniform walked into the room that had devoured million-dollar egos. Clara's jaw tightened in disbelief. Michael, she hissed under her breath, what the hell are you doing? Trust me, he said softly. Eli stopped at the center of the room. Señor Morales, he began in flawless Spanish. You are not being asked to surrender your principles. Ms. Whitmore values your dedication. The Spaniard froze mid-step. Eli turned smoothly to the French representative. Madame Duval, your vision of shared benefit aligns perfectly with Whitmore's. Then to the Germans. Herr Müller, your sense of responsibility is the foundation of any real partnership. He addressed each team in their own language. 5 tongues, 1 purpose. The tension in the room dissolved into stunned silence. For the first time in days, Clara's investors nodded, smiled, even exchanged glances of respect. She looked at Eli, the man she had called worthless that morning, and felt something unfamiliar creep up her throat. It was shame. Eli stood in the middle of that glass room, surrounded by the world's most powerful business figures, speaking with a calm authority that made everyone listen. When he finally finished, the silence that followed was deafening. Clara Whitmore, who had once ordered him to mop floors faster, now stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs. The German executive was the first to speak. This man, he said in accented English, he understands what your professionals do not. The Spaniard nodded. He listens not just to language, but to meaning. The Italians murmured in agreement. Clara felt the ground shift beneath her. The man she'd mocked that morning had just rescued her company from public collapse. The meeting ended in stunned applause. Delegates shook Eli's hand as if he were a diplomat. When they finally left, Clara remained seated, staring at him through a blur of disbelief. Michael broke the silence. Well, he said, I think we just found our miracle. Later that evening, the parking garage was nearly empty. Eli loaded cleaning supplies into the back of an old gray sedan that looked like it had seen more decades than paychecks. He moved slowly, every motion deliberate, like a man who had learned to carry dignity even in exhaustion. Michael appeared beside him, still in his suit but without his tie. Where did you learn to do what you did in there? He asked. Eli paused, resting his arm on the open trunk. My mother. She came here from Jamaica when I was 5. She used to clean offices in the financial district. I'd sit in empty boardrooms doing my homework while she mopped around me. The executives left behind contracts, notes, and translation printouts. I read everything I could find. Michael smiled, impressed. So you taught yourself languages? Not just words, Eli said. Culture, emotion, people. You can't really understand a language until you know why people choose certain words instead of others. He lifted the mop bucket into the trunk. I got a scholarship once to study linguistics at Columbia. But when my mom had a stroke, I had to turn it down. Someone had to pay the bills. Michael looked down, humbled. You could have been running companies instead of cleaning them. Eli smiled faintly. Maybe. But Mom taught me something more important than ambition. Dignity. She said, it doesn't matter if you sweep floors or sign contracts. What matters is that you do it with honor. He shut the trunk. Guess that stuck. The next morning, the skyscraper buzzed with whispers. By noon, every department had heard the story. The janitor who saved $1 billion deal. Some were inspired, others scoffed. Clara watched from her office window 30 floors above as Eli pushed his cart across the plaza. From that height, he looked small again, just another uniform among hundreds. But she knew better now. Michael entered her office with a determined look. We need to talk about Eli Turner. Clara didn't turn from the window. The janitor? She asked sharply. The linguist, he corrected. The one who saved your empire. She finally faced him. Michael, yesterday was an anomaly. We can't run a Fortune 500 company with untrained staff handling international negotiations. He's not untrained. He's unrecognized, Michael countered. Do you know what the board will say if they hear a janitor led our meeting? She shot back. We'll be a laughingstock. They already laughed when the merger almost failed, Michael said calmly. Now they're silent because it succeeded. Clara's phone buzzed. She glanced down. A text from the Spanish delegate. Please ensure Mr. Turner is present for our follow-up session today. Another from the French representative. We would like your translator from yesterday to attend. And a third from the Italians. We prefer the gentleman who truly listens. Her pulse quickened. You've got to be kidding me, Michael smiled. Looks like your janitor just got promoted by 4 international corporations. By 2 o'clock, Eli stood in the conference room again, wearing the same uniform, his name tag slightly crooked. The executives exchanged skeptical looks, and Clara watched from the head of the table, arms crossed tightly. Ladies and gentlemen, she began. Mr. Turner will assist with communications today. The Germans nodded politely. The Spanish team smiled. The Frenchwoman clasped her hands in approval, and then the meeting began. Eli didn't just translate. He built bridges. He anticipated cultural gaps before they caused friction, rephrased complex legal concepts into human terms, and restored trust in the room. Every time a misunderstanding surfaced, he diffused it with empathy and precision. Halfway through the session, Clara realized something she hadn't in years. She was learning. Watching him speak, she saw grace where she expected awkwardness, intelligence where she'd once seen invisibility. When the meeting ended, applause broke out again. And this time it was Clara who clapped first. That evening, as the board gathered in their private chamber, the mood was ice cold. Clara, said CFO Robert Hale, his tone sharp, I just got word that you allowed cleaning staff to lead a negotiation worth billions. Not lead, she replied evenly. Assist, semantics, Hale snapped. This is beyond unprofessional, it's reckless. The company's general counsel, Patricia Wynne, adjusted her glasses. What happens when this gets out? Sterling, Duval, and Morales trusting a janitor over our executives? That's corporate suicide, Clara straightened. The Europeans requested him. They trust him because he earned it. Hale leaned back, his voice dripping with disdain. You're letting emotion cloud your judgment. He's an uncredentialed employee. If he makes one mistake, who's liable? Clara exhaled slowly. Give me 48 hours, she said. If this doesn't work, I'll handle it personally. The room murmured in reluctant agreement. When the board members left, Clara sat alone in the dim light, staring at the city through glass walls. She thought about Eli's calm voice, his quiet dignity, about the moment she'd called him worthless. Her reflection in the window looked powerful but hollow. Downstairs, Eli faced a different kind of battle. His co-workers gathered in the janitor's break room, old chairs, vending machine humming, the air heavy with bleach and doubt. Man, you're playing with fire, said Carlos, an older custodian with weary eyes. Rich folks don't like it when you show 'em up. You should have just done your job and stayed out of it, added Lena, the night shift supervisor. I've seen this story before. They'll use you, then forget you. Eli leaned against the wall, arms folded. If doing what's right gets me fired, so be it. I'd rather be broke with self-respect than silent with regret. Carlos sighed. You talk like a preacher. Eli smiled faintly. Maybe I just believe in better endings. Upstairs, Clara's phone buzzed again. A message from Michael. The Europeans have requested a second session. They refused to proceed without Eli. Clara closed her eyes, knowing what that meant. The next 48 hours would determine not just the future of her company, but of one man she'd almost destroyed. And for the first time in years, she wasn't sure who was saving whom. The following morning began before sunrise, the city still half asleep, but Clara Whitmore's building already pulsed with nervous energy. Eli arrived early, mop cart rolling softly through the lobby. The security guards nodded to him now instead of ignoring him. Even the receptionist smiled, though uncertainly, like greeting someone who had suddenly changed status without warning. Upstairs, Clara stood in her glass-walled office staring at 2 emails she couldn't ignore. One was from the board reminding her of the 48-hour ultimatum. The other was from the Spanish team confirming that the entire European alliance refused to meet unless Eli Turner was present. By 10 o'clock, the conference room filled again with tailored suits, translators, and a heavy silence. Clara entered last, expression composed, every movement precise. She spoke crisply. "Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Turner will assist in today's negotiations." Eli nodded politely, still in his worn uniform, sleeves rolled and name tag slightly crooked. This time, no one laughed. The meeting began with complex debate over manufacturing rights. When tempers rose, Eli stepped in, never interrupting, only clarifying. He reframed arguments until each side realized they were chasing the same goal with different words. He replaced tension with understanding. When the French team insisted on shared benefits, Eli explained they meant mutual trust, not greed. When the Germans spoke of responsibility, he unpacked it as ethical duty, not liability. The Italians, tense about hierarchy, relaxed when he translated their concern as family loyalty. Hours slipped by unnoticed. By the end, the delegates were smiling, trading jokes in multiple languages, clinking coffee cups instead of folders. Clara watched him astonished. The janitor she'd mocked was commanding a room full of executives with nothing but kindness and precision. After they left, she remained seated, unable to speak. Michael stood beside her, hands in his pockets. "Still think he doesn't belong here?" he asked gently. Clara exhaled slowly. "He doesn't belong here," she murmured. "He belongs higher." That night, the boardroom transformed from admiration to accusation. Robert Hale's voice sliced through the air. "Clara, you've overstepped. This little experiment has the board questioning your fitness to lead." Patricia Wynne folded her arms. "We cannot have maintenance employees managing international contracts. It undermines corporate credibility." Clara met their eyes one by one. "What undermines credibility," she said, "is failing to recognize genius when it mops your floor." "Genius?" Hale scoffed. "You're emotional, Clara. He's unqualified, uninsured, unvetted." "Give me 48 hours, she interrupted. "If he fails, I'll end this myself." The vote passed narrowly. As they filed out, Hale muttered, "When this collapses, we'll have your resignation ready." Alone in the quiet boardroom, Clara pressed her palms against the polished table. She felt the same helpless tremor she'd felt the day her father died and left her the company. She wasn't afraid of failure. She was afraid of being wrong about people. Downstairs in the janitorial lounge that smelled faintly of bleach and coffee, Eli faced his own reckoning. Carlos leaned against a locker. "You made him nervous, brother. People like us, we stay invisible for a reason." "Maybe invisible's overrated," Eli replied. Lena sighed. "You think they'll let you keep this up? They'll take your words, your ideas, and toss you out once they're done." Eli looked at the floor, then back at them. "Then I'll still sleep knowing I helped someone understand someone else." That's enough. The next morning, the building felt charged, rumors swirling, executives whispering. Clara's assistant burst into her office, breathless. "The Japanese delegation's here. They're arguing with their Korean partners, translators out sick." Clara closed her eyes. "Of course he is." Michael appeared in the doorway. "We could postpone." "No," Clara said quietly, already looking through the glass toward the lobby where Eli pushed his cart. "We're not postponing." Minutes later, Eli stood at her side in a smaller conference room packed with agitated executives. Japanese and Korean voices overlapped in frustration. The translator app on someone's phone sputtered nonsense. Clara stepped forward. "Gentlemen, this is Mr. Turner. He specializes in cross-cultural communication." All eyes turned to the man in the janitor's uniform. Eli bowed slightly to the Japanese side, then to the Koreans. In polite, formal Japanese, he began, "I understand there are concerns about design specifications and production quality." The lead Japanese executive frowned, but nodded. "Your partners refuse to meet our standards." Eli turned to the Korean side, switching languages mid-sentence. "They are worried you ask for impossible conditions, but they do not wish to embarrass you by saying so." Within 10 minutes, the true issue surfaced. Not quality, but pride. The Japanese engineers had created specs no machine could meet. Admitting error would cause loss of face. The Koreans feared disrespecting them by refusing. Eli moved carefully, suggesting collaboration. Perhaps Japan's innovation and Korea's precision together could create a hybrid model superior to both. Silence. Then the Japanese executive smiled. That would honor both teams. The Korean representative nodded in agreement. By the end of the hour, laughter replaced argument. They left shaking hands, exchanging business cards. Outside the room, Clara stopped Eli. "How did you learn to do that?" He smiled. "People speak different languages, but they argue for the same reasons: fear, pride, hope. You just have to translate the emotion, not the words." That night, she sat alone again in her office while the city glittered below. Emails poured in, new investors, revived deals, foreign partners praising Whitmore's remarkable interpreter. Her phone buzzed with Hale's message. Emergency board meeting, 9 p.m. When she walked in, every face was turned toward her. Hale began, "Your janitor has made us famous for the wrong reasons. 3 news outlets are already calling. What's your endgame?" Clara placed a folder on the table. To turn survival into transformation. She opened her laptop and played recorded testimonials from every partner Eli had helped. Spanish, French, Japanese, Korean, each voice praising Whitmore's newfound understanding. Then she said quietly, "Effective immediately, Eli Turner is Director of Cultural Communications. He will report directly to me." The board exploded in protests. Hale slammed his hand down. "You can't just promote a janitor to executive." "I just did," Clara said. Her uncle, the chairman, spoke for the first time. "What's his salary?" $150,000 with bonuses, she replied. Gasps around the table, she continued. "And a new internal program, the Whitmore Talent Initiative, allowing any employee to advance based on merit, not position." The chairman leaned back, studying her. "Your father always said talent is our only currency. Let's see if his daughter still remembers how to invest it." 4 hands rose in favor. The motion passed. Outside in the quiet hall, Clara let herself exhale for the first time all week. She had just changed the company and maybe her life. As she looked down from the window later that night, Eli was still there, wheeling his old cart through the empty lobby. But now she didn't see a janitor. She saw the man who had turned language into power, and something in her chest shifted, something that had nothing to do with business. The next few weeks blurred into movement and whispers. Everyone in Whitmore Global had something to say about Eli Turner. Some called him a miracle, others a threat to the old order. But every corridor hummed with his name. Clara didn't know when admiration had turned into curiosity, or when curiosity had shifted into something warmer. She only knew that when she walked into a meeting and saw him there, polished now in a fitted suit but still humble in posture, her pulse always quickened. Eli handled his new role with quiet brilliance. Every negotiation that had been stalled for months seemed to bend toward progress under his touch. He spoke softly, but when he did, people listened. He had a way of pulling humanity out of bureaucracy, of making even the most rigid executives drop their masks. One afternoon, Clara watched through the glass as he mediated between 2 furious marketing heads from rival divisions. Their shouting filled the hallway until Eli raised his hand. "You're both right," he said simply. "You just care about different parts of the same problem." In 2 sentences, he had diffused tension that 3 managers couldn't solve in a month. When the meeting ended, she stopped him at the door. "How do you do that?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "I spent a lifetime cleaning messes. Now I just do it with words." That night, long after the office lights dimmed, Clara lingered by the window. Her reflection stared back at her, poised, controlled, lonely. The phone on her desk buzzed with another congratulatory message from an investor, but it didn't fill the quiet space that had started to grow inside her. She found herself thinking about Eli's voice, calm and steady even under pressure. About the way he'd never once raised it, even when humiliated. The board, however, had not softened. Hale prowled like a wolf denied its meal. "The media's calling it the janitor revolution," he spat in one meeting. "You've turned this company into a circus." "Call it evolution," Clara replied, but she could feel his anger tightening around her. When he learned that foreign partners were requesting Eli personally, his disdain sharpened into something uglier. "They don't trust you anymore," he hissed after one session. "They trust him." "Then maybe that means we've earned the right to change," she answered. By the following month, Whitmore Global was booming again. New contracts, new partnerships, new headlines. The company that listens. The janitor who spoke the world's languages. Investors poured money in, inspired by the story of humility and transformation, and yet, the more the world praised them, The quieter things became between Clara and Eli. Their conversation stretched longer, lingering past business hours. She found reasons to stop by his office, to ask about minor details she could have delegated. Sometimes they sat in silence, the hum of the city beneath them, saying nothing at all but understanding everything. One evening, she found him on the rooftop garden after a long board meeting. The skyline glowed orange against the fading light. He turned when she approached, startled. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "Couldn't stop thinking," she admitted, "about what this company was and what it's becoming." He nodded, leaning on the railing. "Change isn't easy for people who've built their comfort on control." "I used to think control was leadership," she said quietly. "But maybe it's just fear in disguise." He glanced at her, a soft smile playing at his lips. "You're learning faster than most CEOs," she laughed. "And you're far too comfortable talking to one like that." He turned to face her fully. "You stopped being just a CEO the day you listened." The words landed deeper than she expected. For a long moment they just looked at each other, the city lights reflected in both their eyes. Then she said softly, "When I humiliated you that day, why didn't you fight back?" He took a slow breath. "Because my mother taught me that anger is easy. Dignity takes work." She looked away, ashamed. "I was cruel." He shook his head. "You were human, and I've seen worse." The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was alive, pulsing with everything neither dared say. She wanted to thank him, to apologize again, to tell him how much he'd changed her understanding of value. Instead, she said, "Would you ever want to go back? To school, to the path you lost?" He smiled wistfully. "I used to dream about it every night. Now I think maybe my education was supposed to happen here." She studied his face, wondering when it had become so familiar to her. "You're changing the world one translation at a time, Eli Turner." He chuckled. "One misunderstanding at a time." A week later, the company prepared for the final signing of the European Alliance, a deal worth more than everything Clara's father had built in his lifetime. The conference hall was filled with reporters, executives, and cameras. Every handshake mattered. Every signature carried the weight of hundreds of jobs. But halfway through the negotiations, disaster struck. New U.S. regulations had surfaced overnight, complicating the agreement. The European partners panicked, whispering about liability and risk. Hale leaned in and muttered, "If this falls apart, the board will replace you by morning." Clara's pulse thundered. She could feel the deal unraveling, months of progress dissolving in confusion. The French were furious, the Germans ready to leave, the Spaniards threatening legal withdrawal. And then, across the chaos, her eyes met Eli's. He was sitting quietly at the edge of the table, observing, waiting. Something about his calmness steadied her. Without thinking, words escaped her mouth, sharp, desperate, and reckless. "Eli," she said, voice rising above the noise, "if you can save this deal, I'll marry you." The room froze. Dozens of heads turned. Hale choked on his coffee. Eli blinked, stunned. "Clara." But she couldn't take it back. The silence had already swallowed the room. He stood slowly, buttoning his jacket, his face unreadable. "Then let's make sure this company survives your proposal." As he walked toward the center of the room, everyone's attention shifted. He began calmly, almost conversationally, addressing each delegate in their language, explaining the regulatory shift and what it truly meant. "The problem isn't law," he said. "It's trust. Each of you fears the other will use these regulations as weapons. Let's build a structure that rewards cooperation instead of punishing it." He outlined a new framework: shared accountability, shared protection, shared reward. It was bold, unconventional, brilliant. Within hours, the impossible deal was alive again, stronger than before. When the last contract was signed, champagne corks popped and applause thundered through the hall. Clara stood frozen, watching Eli surrounded by delegates, shaking hands, smiling faintly. She realized she wasn't just grateful. She was changed, and maybe, just maybe, she was in love. The applause slowly faded, leaving behind a stunned quiet. Clara stood motionless, hands trembling slightly as she realized what she'd said in front of 40 international executives and half her own board. Her voice still echoed in her head. "If you can save this deal, I'll marry you." Eli turned to her, calm even in chaos. "We did it," he said softly. She could barely meet his eyes. He smiled faintly. "You don't have to explain anything. You spoke from instinct." But as the crowd swelled with congratulations, something deeper stirred between them. something that had nothing to do with contracts or signatures. When the delegates finally departed, leaving champagne glasses and scattered folders, the two of them remained. The conference room that had witnessed humiliation, redemption, and rebirth now stood still. Eli loosened his tie, looked at her with quiet amusement. "So, about that proposal." Her face flushed scarlet. "That was adrenaline. I wasn't thinking." He tilted his head. "Maybe not, but sometimes people only tell the truth when they stop thinking." She stared at him, words trapped behind the walls she'd built her whole life. "Do you think I meant it?" "I think," he said gently, "you don't know yet." For the first time since she'd inherited the company, Clara felt speechless. She wanted to thank him, to apologize, to start again, but all she managed was, "Dinner tomorrow, no business talk." Eli's eyes softened. "Just dinner?" "Just dinner," she said, though her heart already knew it wasn't true. The next night they met at a quiet restaurant on the river. No board members, no suits, no tension, just two people stripped of their titles. He asked about her childhood, and she laughed for the first time in months. She asked about his mother, and his eyes lit up with warmth and pride. "You know," she said halfway through dessert, "the first time I saw you, I thought you were invisible." "I was," he replied, "but invisibility is just what happens when no one bothers to look." Something inside her cracked at those words. She reached for his hand without meaning to. "I see you now," she whispered. From that night forward, everything changed. They worked side by side, always professional, always careful, but the air between them carried a current that neither could ignore. People began to notice the way she smiled when he entered a room, the way he defended her decisions before anyone else could. Then came the story no one expected. CEO promotes janitor to executive. Now he's saving the company. News outlets devoured it. Investors called it revolutionary. The world celebrated Whitmore Global as a symbol of second chances, but the board didn't celebrate for long. Hale struck again, calling an emergency meeting. "This can't continue," he barked. "The company's reputation is turning into a fairy tale. Are we a corporation or a charity?" Clara met his glare. "We're a company that values potential." "Potential doesn't pay dividends," he snapped. "No," she said evenly, "but trust does." The room went silent. Her uncle, the chairman, leaned back slowly, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I remember your father saying the same thing," he murmured. "Carry on, Ms. Whitmore." The board meeting ended with Hale storming out and Clara realizing she had just cemented her legacy. Months passed. The company flourished. And then came the night of the annual Whitmore Gala, a celebration of everything they had rebuilt. The ballroom glittered with gold chandeliers, laughter, and the hum of success. Clara stood on stage in an emerald gown, her voice steady as she addressed the crowd. 3 years ago, we learned a simple truth. Talent doesn't wear a label. Tonight, we celebrate those who were once unseen. Applause thundered as she introduced the first honoree, a former receptionist turned financial analyst. The second, a warehouse worker who'd developed a new logistics model. And finally, the last, Eli Turner, now Chief Director of Cultural Relations. As he walked to the stage, applause rose to a roar. Cameras flashed, but Clara saw only him. The man who had once mopped her floors now stood beside her, radiant with quiet pride. When the ceremony ended, they slipped out to the rooftop terrace. The city glowed beneath them, endless and alive. "Still nervous around heights?" he asked. "Not anymore," she said, gazing at the skyline. "You made me stop looking down," he smiled. "You made me start looking up." A long pause settled between them, filled with the hum of the city and the pulse of memory. Then he said softly, "Do you remember what you said that first day? In the lobby?" Her stomach turned at the memory. "I try not to. You said, 'If you can translate this, I'll marry you,'" she groaned. "Don't remind me." It was cruel, he admitted, but maybe prophetic. Before she could reply, he dropped to one knee, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "Clara Whitmore, will you marry me for real this time?" Tears blurred her vision. "We're already engaged," she whispered. He smiled. "Then this time I just want to hear you say yes again." "Yes," she breathed. Then louder, "Yes, I'll marry you again." The city below them shimmered like a living thing, and for once neither of them felt invisible. A year later, headlines told the story. CEO marries former janitor, a love that rebuilt an empire. But behind the headlines was something quieter, something no article could capture. Two people who had taught each other what worth truly meant. At their wedding reception, surrounded by employees, friends, and partners from across the world, Clara raised her glass. To seeing, she said simply, because when you choose to see people, everything changes. Eli looked at her and smiled the way he had that first day in the conference room. Calm, knowing, full of light, and somewhere deep inside, they both knew the truth that had built everything they now stood upon. Sometimes, the smallest act of recognition can translate an entire life.